Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
Okay, well, I guess I shouldn't beat around the bush. My name is Violet Hunter. This is my second time making a recording for the Paranormal Pinkerton audio archives. An incident recently happened that wasn't exactly an assigned case, but, well, it closely involved Detective Sean Russo. So, Sean said I should make an official record of it. He says that who he calls the eggheads pore over the archives to update the Pinkerton database on supernatural creatures, and what I have to say might be useful. I just took his word for it. Where to start? So, Sean and I, well, we've been dating for a while now. Not to get too into this sort of thing, but we had a bit of a rough patch at one time. I think I was afraid, both of what would happen to me if I remained involved in his line of work, but really more afraid of what would happen to Sean. Since I got to know him, he's been acquiring these horrible scars and injuries. Once he just disappeared for a few hours and came back missing an eye and talking about time travel and any other line of work. I think he'd gone insane. But after getting kidnapped by some sort of satanic cult and nearly murdered, these sort of things come across as more plausible. And of course, there was the horrible incident where Sean disappeared for days, and I had to get whisked off to some secret base while a monster tracked me down. Thank God Paranormal Pinkerton takes care of their own. But I'm starting to ramble. The point is, we'd talked it out, and we're in a good place. I tried to make peace with the fact that Sean would be in danger, and support him how I could. And I trusted Sean. That was important too. We were getting serious, so I decided it was about time he met my parents. Sean doesn't have any family. His parents died when he was a teenager, and he was an only child. My parents still live in Ireland, in a tiny little village called Eastport. My dad worked in the fishing industry for years, and my mum kept the house. I have 3 siblings as well, 2 brothers and a sister, but none of them are going to be home. So it'll just be me, Sean, and my parents. So we took a 5-day trip to Ireland. I hadn't told my parents everything about Sean, of course. I know the Paranormal Pinkertons have rules on that sort of thing. I told them he was a private investigator. I really wasn't all that worried about them meeting. Sean can be a charming guy if he wants to be. And he turned it up for my parents. They were concerned about the salary he was making, but the blue-collar nature of the work Sean did went off well with my father. They were concerned that Sean had been divorced, but were happy that there were no kids in the mix, and Sean made it very clear that he had no more involvement with his ex. My parents were nominally Catholic, but they weren't immune to Sean's open devotion to the faith either. So, on day 5 of the visit, things were looking up. Sean had made a good impression on Mom and Dad. I'd enjoyed seeing my parents again, and despite all of that, I was looking forward to getting back to the States and to college. A successful trip, I'd say. But then something happened on the final day. Okay, so I'm not being entirely honest, I guess. Something had been bothering me. I had taken Sean on this trip, but I still didn't really know what Sean had planned for our future. And, okay, I didn't really know what I wanted either. Do I love Sean? Yes, I did. I do. Did I want to marry him? The question scared me. Sean's job was dangerous. But where was this all leading to otherwise? It had been raining out all day, so we had stayed inside. My parents lived in a tiny home in the village. You could almost call it a cottage if it hadn't had electricity. It was old and weather-worn, and a little ugly, but it was home, and I was very used to it. Sean was telling some sort of story, making people laugh, but it was in the air that we were leaving tomorrow, and that meant there was this air of melancholy, I suppose, to the whole thing. The future was on everyone's mind. Dad had been drinking. He was not a drunk, but when he did drink, it tended to make his tongue looser than normal. He asked Sean a question.
"Well, Shawnee boy,"
said Dad.
He never would have called him that sober. "You're definitely a good egg, and make no mistake about that. I'm curious, though, if you are intending on proposing to my daughter."
The air in the room suddenly grew tense. I felt my face turn red. Dad! I told you already, we hadn't discussed it yet.
"I know what you said, Princess. But he came all the way to our little Irish village just to meet us, and that spells something serious to me. What are your long-term plans, Mr. Russo? Are you gonna marry my daughter?"
I looked at my mother desperately. "Ma'am, please." She just looked intrigued. "Sorry, sweetheart, but I'd like to know the answer to this question too. What are your long-term intentions with our daughter?" I looked over at Sean, who put his hand on my shoulder reassuringly.
"It's fine."
I was not convinced. But Sean continued speaking.
"You already know about Cynthia. We're divorced. That said, in the eyes of the church, we're married. I take that sort of thing pretty seriously. Before I consider marriage, I need to consider getting an annulment. Nowadays, that's pretty straightforward. But it isn't guaranteed, and the whole process can take a long time."
At this point, my jaw dropped. "I'm sorry, Sean. What? An annulment?" Sean had figured out by my tone that I wasn't happy with this.
"Well, if we want to have a future together..."
"You two haven't been married for years!"
"No, but..."
"Then why on God's green earth should anything we do have to wait on the actions of that... I was getting worked up, and I struggled to find the right word. "That hussy!" Don't judge me too harshly, okay? I was upset. Sean grabbed my hands.
"Listen, Violet, that's not what I mean. It's just we haven't planned our future properly yet, and..."
"Then let's discuss it now, Sean." I looked at my dad, who actually cowered back a bit. I must have looked furious. "You ready, Dan? Let's discuss our future together. I have to make sacrifices for you, Sean. You work a dangerous job. You disappear for days at a time, no contact, nothing. And you come back with these horrifying injuries. And then people come after me because of your bloody job." My parents were looking at me, stunned. My mom was speechless, but Dad turned back and forth between us.
What happened? You didn't tell us anything about this.
Sean started to say something, but I felt myself getting upset, and I didn't want to cry in front of everyone. So I stood up. I'm not telling you everything, of course, because this isn't about Sean and my relationship, right? You don't need to know how every time one of us would bring up the future, the other would change the subject, or Sean would refuse to speak to me about Cynthia, or how, as I fell in love with Sean, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares, terrified he'd been killed by some horrifying monster, or... Sorry. So I walked outside. The rain had stopped recently, but it was still wet out. I didn't care. I needed air, and to take a walk, and to think. So I walked and walked, not even thinking of where I was going or why. This town had been my childhood home. I knew it better than I knew the back of my hand. So even though I didn't have a plan for where I was going, I knew. There was a little creek on the outskirts of town. Not that it was very far to the outskirts, with a rock that I used to sit on as a child. That's where I was going to think. I can tell you what made me so upset now that I'm looking back and thinking about it. But at the time, not so much. So I just sat down and cried. And that's when I heard his voice. "Why are you looking so upset there, lassie, when it's your lucky day?" I nearly jumped in the air. Standing in front of me was a little man. I mean, no taller than a foot. Hairy and wild-looking, wearing nothing but a loincloth. "What? Who are you?" I managed to squeak out. But I knew. Everyone in Ireland knows someone who's seen them before. The little man laughed. "I think you already know, else you'd have run off, wouldn't you, lass? I'm a leprechaun. Make no mistake about that. Why, just take a look behind you." I turned around, and sure enough, I was sitting right next to the end of a rainbow. I turned back to the leprechaun. "What is it you want from me? I'm warning you, my boyfriend is out." No, missy. You've got it all wrong. I'm here to help you. We don't carry around piles of gold anymore. Too much of a hassle, you see. But I'm here to grant you a wish. I shook my head. I might have been conflicted about Sean, but I wasn't stupid. "No deal. Thanks." I stood up to leave, but the leprechaun just chuckled. "I wasn't asking, lass. You've spotted one of the fair folk, and the race of Adam doesn't get to walk away from these encounters scot-free, you see. Just be lucky you met a nice, handsome fella like me, instead of one of our less savory figures. So, go ahead. Just make your wish." I didn't say anything, but the leprechaun clapped his hands anyway and laughed. "Ho ho! So that's it, eh? Very well. If that be your wish, then that your wish be." Wait, I didn't say anything? You didn't need to, lass. I can read your heart well enough. And besides, here the leprechaun gave an unnaturally large smile. "Word has spread about Sean Russo in the old country." The world started to dissolve around me. I started to run, but the leprechaun just laughed. I screamed as the earth disappeared under my feet, and I think that's when I passed out. The next thing I remembered, I sat bolt upright in my bed, screaming. It took me a second to get orientated to where I was. Sean had given me advice on what to do if I was transported somewhere. It had happened to Sean more than once before. My roommate Annie turned over to look at me. Yes, roommate. I was back in Boston University. "Violet, are you okay?" she said with concern. I took a deep breath. I was back at school. The leprechaun apparently hadn't hurt me, but somehow he'd sent me across the pond to my dorm room bed. I answered Annie carefully. I'm fine. Just a nightmare." "Must have been some nightmare," said Annie as she rolled back to bed. Typical. I stumbled over to the bathroom, grabbing my phone on the way, which was sitting on my nightstand. I checked the date. It was 2021. I felt myself start to grow faint. Back in time. The leprechaun had sent me back in time. He popped up in front of me. Like an invisible bubble in reality had burst, and he had been waiting inside. He walked on the air in front of me, as if it was solid ground. "Not back in time exactly, lassie, but close enough. It takes a certain type of magic to travel the same timeline, and not the type used by us tiny ones. But it's all the same to you. I've granted your wish, and don't you worry about speaking too loud now. Your pretty friend asleep can't hear us." "I didn't make a wish!" The leprechaun looked annoyed. "Again with a malarkey? Of course you did. You just didn't say it out loud. You wanted to live a life without having met Sean Russo. Now be your chance. Remember that internship at the old Ruth Castle Manor? Moved it to a different colonial home. Or so you'll learn when you speak to your professor about it. No Ruth Castle, no rescue, no need to speak to Sean Russo. You can live your life as you see fit." The little man took a bow. "And you're welcome." The leprechaun was referring, of course, to how Sean and I had met. I was working an internship helping to restore an old colonial mansion. I was starting to get creeped out by the owner and was given the number of the Paranormal Pinkertons. Long story short, Sean rescued me from being a part of some sort of weird cultic sacrifice thing, and, well, we started to meet more after that. I tried to grab the leprechaun, but he danced out of the way. "No, I don't want this!" "Your words and thoughts don't match, lassie. I know what I saw back in the old country. You were thinking to yourself how much easier things would be if you'd never met Sean Russo. So, I just made it so." I felt my face color. Well, nothing. The deed is done." I felt things start to spiral. How do I undo it? Undo it? You don't undo it, lass. You want to undo it, find another leprechaun, make another wish. We don't appear at the end of every rainbow, of course, so it may take you a while. Generally, someone finds one of us, about once every 100 years or so. And I don't think anyone's ever had the fortune to find one of us 2 times in a row. But, good luck. With that, He started laughing hysterically, doubled over, slapping his knee. I made another desperate grab at him, but with another pop, he was gone. I stood over the sink in the bathroom and took several deep breaths. I tried to remember what Sean had taught me about these sort of situations. The key is to not panic. Leprechauns aren't the only creatures out there. What else might be able to help me? I knew about Morgana. I'd faced her down myself once. But she was a dangerous, terrifying witch. She might be able to do something, but what could I even offer her? I cast my mind through all the supernatural creatures Sean had taught me about, but was drawing a blank. I knew Sean had been involved in time travel before, but according to the leprechaun, this wasn't really time travel, but more like slipping into another universe. Or was this all in my head? If he could make something this realistic, then I really was trapped. No, I had to assume this was real somehow. And if it wasn't time travel, I'd somehow been sent to a parallel universe where I hadn't met Sean. Sean. Hold on. Was Sean the key? Sean had that ring of his. The ring that broke enchantments. If he still had it in this world, then maybe that was my way out. But what do I do? I remembered Sean's number, but when I called him, he didn't pick up. Duh. I was an unknown number. I tried to think of a voice message to send that didn't make me sound insane. But there was nothing. I knew what I had to do. I had to go down to NJ and visit him. Okay, I know what you have to be thinking. That's even more insane. Why would he take me more seriously then? But my thinking was like this. A phone call is easy to ignore. If he's a paranormal Pinkerton, I know he has cases routed to him by control. So he won't be listening to me. But if he sees me in person, asking him for help, maybe that'll be enough. So I made myself look presentable, made my excuses to Anne, and got into the car and started driving to Sean's apartment in NJ. The Washington apartment I remembered, and not the Phillipsburg apartment he lives in now. On the way, I did some deep thinking about what the leprechaun said to me. Deep down, did I not want to be with Sean? I didn't believe that the leprechaun could read my heart, but he could read my mind. I was upset with Sean at the time. But even that wasn't really it. I was scared about the future. But now, here it was, an opportunity to change the future. I guess I had to decide. What scared me more? A life with Sean, or a life without him? Without warning, mid-drive, the leprechaun popped into the seat next to me, causing me to nearly swerve into incoming traffic. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, you startled me! I noticed the leprechaun flinch at the sound of the names. Of course, I'd used them in vain, so it didn't do anything. What do you want now? You think I was born yesterday, lassie? I know where you're going, though I don't right know what your plan is. Do you really think this is such a good idea? I clenched my hands on the steering wheel. It's my choice to make, not yours. Oh, to be sure. Still, The leprechaun paused for a moment. Still, lass, Shawnee boy doesn't know who you are, and you weren't happy with him. Why not take the second chance? Go your own way. It might even be better for him, not to have a lassie of his own to be worrying about on top of everything else. That was a point. Was it good for Sean to have someone like me to worry about? I don't have any particular skills that would make me useful to someone in the Paranormal Pinkerton, outside of the typical Irish ability to see through the veil. It's not like Sean needs help with that, with his ring. It was an angle I was ashamed of myself for not considering. What did I bring to Sean? I could only think of one thing. Sean loved me, and I loved him. This was what sustained me, you see. This was why I kept driving, ignoring the chattering of the grubby little man in my ear for the next 6 hours on the road. So, there was something Sean had told me about once. He said that there was this time he also had a wish granted. He was sent to a world where he hadn't divorced his wife and had a successful career as a real estate agent. But he didn't stay. He went back. I asked him why. Why did he come back? Sean looked thoughtful.
The life I was living was fun. Definitely a lot more glamorous than this Pinkerton gig. But it was godless. I didn't like the person I was in that world.
He looked at me seriously.
I know how this must sound to you, but the Lord had plans for me here.
I told him it sounded fine, but at the time, I really didn't understand what he meant. Now, I did. I thought of the sort of person I was before I met Sean. I had plans to make a career in archaeology and old architecture, but my life had been empty. Multiple boyfriends and nothing meaningful. Nothing on the horizon and no clear vision of why I was living the life I was, or what I could bring to the world. Sean had changed all that. He showed me that there was a different way, a higher way, a way that I could live too. And that's the reason I was knocking on the door of his flat at 5 p.m. I wondered if he'd even be home. But, to my surprise, he opened the door. I just stared at him for a moment. Here was Sean, with 2 eyes, less scars, but Sean nonetheless. And he had no idea who I was. He spoke first, after our awkward staring contest.
Can I help you?
I did notice one hand was hidden behind the door. The leprechaun had disappeared. He knew Sean would be able to see him, you see. I gathered myself together. I need help. Sean squinted at me.
With what?
It's the Paranormal Pinkerton business. This was the speech I had planned on in the car. But it was a lot different giving it while having a conversation with this alternate universe Sean in the flesh. Sean squinted at me, then stepped aside.
All right. Come on in.
I blinked in surprise. Really? Just like that?
You're human, miss. Believe me. I'd know if you weren't. And I don't see anyone else with you. I'm not sure what you're doing here, but let's discuss it privately.
I guess he was right. I stepped into Sean's apartment. It was utterly bizarre standing in a building I knew for a fact Sean didn't live in anymore. We sat across from each other at a table. I cleared my throat and began to speak. This is going to sound insane.
Miss, not to brag about this, but at this point, try me.
He asked for it, I suppose. I was sent here from another timeline by a rogue leprechaun. In that world, we're actually dating, and you were meeting my parents in Ireland. All thought of nuancing things had been thrown to the wind, and I felt tears form in my eyes. Sean stared at me dumbly for a moment.
I'm sorry.
I know, it sounds insane. But look, I know your favorite color is blue. And I know you carry a prayer card to Venerable Matt Talbot with you, and you are a recovering alcoholic. I know about your ex-wife, Cynthia, and I know you were trained by an old Paranormal Pinkerton detective that you call Old Tom. And I know about Jack and Jim, and... Sean cut me off.
Okay. So, you learned a lot about me. And about the Paranormal Pinkertons. Look, miss, I want to help you. I really do. But what exactly do you think I could do? And...
Here, Sean hesitated, looking awkward.
Leprechauns grant wishes, right? Rarer in the States than in Ireland, but we do have a lot of Irish here, so they're not unheard of. If you ended up here and we were dating, what sort of wish did you make?
I felt my cheeks color. That's not relevant.
I disagree. I need to know the details of the case.
So, I told him everything. Our fight, how upset I was, and how the leprechaun had granted the wish I had been thinking. This version of Sean took it all very professionally. I guess in order to take all of this, he was in detective mode. Or something like it. By the end of the discussion, my face must have been bright crimson from embarrassment.
Okay, so not to be rude, but you are sure you want to go back? It's all the same to me, you understand.
I grabbed Sean by the hands. Tears were flowing down my face again. Sam looked startled, but he didn't recoil. I'm sorry, Sean. Detective Russo. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. Please help me. Help me. I don't know what else to do or where else to go, but I love you. And I have to get back. At this point, I got too choked up to continue. And Sean shoved the tissues in my face.
All right. I believe you. So, what's your idea?
I took a deep shuddering breath and stared at his hand. Your ring. His eyes widened.
So you know about that too?
I know, Sean. It breaks enchantments. Please, just let me wear the ring. Just for a second, please.
Well, I don't...
The leprechaun popped up next to me, and Sean narrowed his eyes at it.
So you're the thing that cursed this poor girl?
Why, I resent that idea. I granted her wish is all I did, and that's the full truth, laddie. But before you take off that ring, think a moment. Who's to say this lass isn't here on behalf of someone unsavoury, eh? Oh, you're a smart lad. You can imagine the sort of creatures who might want you to take off that ring of yours, eh? I started to sputter in anger, but the tears and my emotions made it difficult for me to choke out the words. But you little dirty... Why? He hovered over Sean's ear as he seriously thought it over. 'Tis true I'm involved in this situation, and make no mistake, but don't be a fool. Sean nodded thoughtfully.
Makes perfect sense.
Without hesitation, and to my great surprise, he took off the ring and stuck it on my finger as the leprechaun howled in rage. Like a glass shattering, I felt myself fall back into the void, just like when the leprechaun had first granted my wish. As I fell through, I heard Sean say, though it got fainter every second,
If you were against it, I knew it must be a good idea.
I came to next to the creek. I was lying on the ground, back in Ireland. Sean was standing over me, my parents behind him.
Violet! Violet, wake up!
He sounded panicked. I sat up suddenly, making him start to stumble back. But before he could, I kissed him, long and hard. I mean, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you do the same? Sean blinked.
Did I miss something?
A bit. I'll tell you about it later.
Okay, but before you do, I have something to tell you.
Sean helped me stand up. My parents walked forward and hugged me, making a fuss, but my eyes were for Sean.
I began the annulment process a month ago. I want our future to be together. One day, I'm going to marry you, Violet Hunter. If you're not afraid of the next step, neither am I.
I threw my parents aside. Sorry, Mom and Dad. And crushed Sean in a hug. Of course I'm not. And, well, that's the end of that story. Since that day, I've avoided rainbows. But I haven't seen the leprechaun since. As for that new ring I have, I sent it to you, Control, at Sean's insistence. I already know about Jim Donovan's ring, and Sean thinks 3 is too many to be floating out there. I hope you took care of it. This is Violet Hunter, signing off for the second, and hopefully last, time.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Anthony Marchetta and recorded by Selena Saucedo. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhosts, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.